Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Guilt-Free Book Club, to our first session of this semester, first of three reading Grading for Growth, a guide to alternative grading practices that promote authentic learning and student engagement in higher education by David Clark and Robert Talbert, who are both professors at Grand Valley State University. And fun fact, in doing the publicity for this series, Robert Talbert and I connected on LinkedIn, and he sends us all his best wishes. And if we have any specific questions, feel free to reach out. So that's pretty cool. Also, really glad to be co-sponsoring this session with Wentworth's Faculty Ambassadors of Inclusive Excellence program. Jeremy can definitely tell us a little bit more about that as well. But it's a really nice collaboration between TLC and the Division of DEI here at Wentworth. And it's in the third year. The third cohort just started this semester of faculty who are committed to using inclusive and equitable instructional practices in their classroom and kind of growing in that way. So really thrilled to continue that partnership. So why don't I just introduce our special guest, Jeremy Wachter, who is a professor of physics here at Wentworth. And he has been interested in and experimenting with alternative grading approaches for a number of years. So really excited to hear about your experiences in that. And I'd love if you would just start us off by sharing your origin story with alternative grading.
Yeah, definitely happy to do so. Happy to be here. Um, I've been enjoying going over the the grading for growth uh, book that you shared. There's a lot of interesting ideas in there. A lot of, I think, the ideas that I like to try to bring into the grading systems that I use in classes. So, sort of how I got started with alternative assessment frameworks is maybe we'll call it a good thing to come out of the COVID pandemic. So this was maybe, I want to say fall of 2020. I was starting my second year at my previous institution, so Skidmore College. I was just a visiting faculty member there, and I had been assigned to teach in the spring a mathematical and computational methods course, which I was very excited for. It's sort of, you could pitch it as everything that you need to know as a physics major, which you don't necessarily learn explicitly in another course, right? So we'll do some Fourier analysis, which is very important for analyzing signals of all sorts. We'll talk about complex mathematics. We'll talk about programming. We'll talk about using like numerically solving systems to, do things like study weather patterns, to examine how complex systems like accumulate crystalline structure and other kinds of structure. So there's a lot of fun stuff in there. And I was talking to previous instructors of this course, and one thing that they noted is that this is a course which has some pretty high level math and some pretty complicated programming by assumption, and it has no prerequisites for higher level math or complicated programming. No programming course required whatsoever. So I say, okay, so I have to teach a bunch of students who like are motivated or are solid students. These are physics majors and minors. They're committed, so they're bought in already. But how exactly am I going to assess this? Where, looking at my roster, I have people who I know have never taken a programming class before, and I have people who I know have like already written and deployed an app. So this was sort of my concern, and by trying to think about this some more, just looking around what other people have been doing, I came across something actually from an English classroom called labor-based contract grading. And so I'll go ahead and share now. This is just a poster that I presented last year at the faculty showcase. So I'll just keep that up in the background for now. But basically, the idea is I settled on a system where what I really wanted to do was encourage the students to regularly engage with the material and develop the material in, or develop sort of more involved, deeper dives in a direction that they found personally interesting and relevant. And this model for grading seemed to match that pretty well because you could sort of structure it as in one part, your grade is based on regularly turning in progress reports, basically making regular submissions to me saying, hey, this is what I've been working on, this is what made sense, this is what I've gotten stuck on. And there's no grade associated to this. I just write them feedback. Okay, I see based on your work that you seem to be getting stuck here. This is how you like get over this little problem. Or here's the relevant section of the notes or the textbook that could help you get unstuck. These sorts of things. So it's formative feedback. And then that's sort of the weekly check-in, regular practice, trying to build these skills over the course of a semester. And then pair that with, so that's the labor-based part, pair that with the contract grading aspect. And that is where the students come up with their own project. And they tell me these are the proficiencies that I would like to demonstrate with this project. I think a very nice example of this is one of my students said, well, I think it's sort of interesting. He plays a lot of guitar. I think it's interesting how different sort of, I don't play guitar, so I'm going to get this wrong, but basically different amplifiers and different attachments or different modifications to the guitar can change the sound. And he wanted to understand that from a more physics perspective, and so designed a little experiment where he recorded the guitar sound, the same note, at with a bunch of different modifications, different amplifiers, different filters, and then looked at how that changed the Fourier spectrum, the breakdown of like the power in different frequencies. So that was just one example. Really, it's whatever the students are most interested in. This is a slight modification. What you're seeing on the screen here is a slight modification to that, but it's still based in the same ideas. Um, I started introducing a little bit more, what would be maybe standards-based grading here, where after several rounds of feedback, I ask the students to turn in a portfolio showing that they can achieve this list of particular skills that I'm looking to develop. And that is something that I think I shifted to just because I wanted to make sure that there was sort of a particular set, a very specific set of skills for the students to focus on, right? I wanted to give them clear indicators of these are the kinds of things that I would like you to be able to do leaving this classroom. Whereas before, when there was just sort of like the regular weekly check-ins, I thought it was a little bit too nebulous. Like, oh, just do some work and I'll let you know what you maybe should work some more on. So yeah, that spring 2021, I guess, was the first case where I trialed this kind of a grading scheme. I did it pretty much yearly since then, and now at Wentworth, I'm doing it in a computational physics class, which I am teaching right now in the most current iteration of this general scheme. Um, you can sort of see on the right column there, overall, the students, I've gotten positive feedback from anonymous surveys as well as from just students directly talking to me. I think one thing that a lot of them appreciate is that they feel less pressure, especially when trying to learn new and complicated materials. They know that they can try repeatedly to reach whatever proficiency it is that I'm asking them to show. And the flip side of that is that it's good for students who don't have a lot of background and sort of need to build up to the more complicated things, but students who come in with a lot of background information can very quickly sink their teeth into more complicated problems through the projects or through self-designed proficiencies. For myself, I have found this a lot more laid back when it comes to grading compared to a more traditional like letter grade, numerical grade based scheme. Of course, you have to translate it to a letter grade at the end of the semester. Anyhow, I can talk about that later. But I am spending all of my mental energy on engaging with the student work and thinking about what it is they're doing and how they're sort of developing from week to week. And I don't have to spend, or honestly, in my opinion, I don't have to waste any energy thinking, okay, so is this a 7 out of 10, an 8 out of 10, a 9 out of 10, an 8.5 out of 10, an 8.23569 out, like that's all gone. I'm at the end of the day, I'm just saying you are proficient in this. You are still working on this. That's the only decision you need to make. So I think that's sort of I think as Josh called it, my origin story. This is how I got into alternative methods of grading, and this is the method of grading that I've pursued most concretely since uh, yeah, since I got into it. But I'm happy to talk more about this, about other ideas that I've been thinking about. And I'm also interested to hear what other folks have maybe been doing about alternate methods of grading, like standards-based grading, proficiency-based grading, ungrading, anything of that nature. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Jeremy, for sharing your experience, origin story, and all the kind of reflections from students. From their perspective, it sounds like a lot of positive feedback, and also just a kind of sigh of relief on your end of not having to parse out, 8.235 and just being able to say, yeah, this is has been met, and this has not yet been met, and here's how you could get there, and then giving the students an opportunity to get there. Um, so yeah, I think that's wonderful. Before we transition out of kind of a Jeremy presentation time, anyone have any thoughts or questions for Jeremy? Let me show.
Oh, I know it. So you mentioned that you're primarily doing this for like it sounds like a more upper level physics course, the computational one. Have you found like doing this style of grading has impacted or changed the way you grade the more like introductory physics courses like physics one or physics two?
Yeah, I will confess a certain cowardice on my part to not yet fully committing to transferring the intro courses over. I think it is doable, and I have slowly been introducing some of these ideas. So, for example, one thing that I've been doing in like physics 1 and 2 classes for a while now is I'm calling it now like a weekly journaling activity. But the idea is I say, hey, here are some things we talked about in the last week. Can you explain to me how this connects to something you see in your day-to-day life? Can you go look at a building and say, well, where do you think the greatest stresses, like the greatest torques here in this building are? Can you go find me like, three examples of different kinds of electrical power systems in your day-to-day life? And so these are, if they give what I think is not really the best physics answer, then I just say, oh, okay, so like here I see you're thinking, maybe this is another way to approach it, but it's still complete. They did it. They engaged with the material. So that's maybe worth, 10% of the total grade. And I've been moving a bit more towards a standards-based grading in laboratories as well, where I'm more saying things like, okay, are you demonstrating proficiency with this technique, with this reporting system, like with this analysis, rather than that. That's very much in its infancy, we'll say. But I'm hoping to, I think over the summer I'll be teaching intro physics, and I think that might be a good time to experiment with a real full conversion and see how the students like it. More in the standards-based grading direction, because I think that's something they could engage with a little bit better than like the very open-ended, oh, just do your work and like do some work every week and I'll tell you how you're doing.
Jeremy, do you feel like in those courses they would still have the opportunity to pick a project to do, or does the curriculum not allow for that?
I think there is totally a way to do it. I think there are like I think the computational physics course makes it a little bit more a little bit easier to decide on a project because there are so many systems you could just simulate, like so many complicated things you could tackle. I think I would probably need to do a little bit more scaffolding for them with an idea of a final project. Give them opportunities for modeling or experimental rather than something analytical as well. Um, I think there's a way to do it. I haven't quite yet decided if I want to do like the contract based for the intro classes, but I think it's possible. I just need to sit down and have a real serious think about it.
Oh, Melissa,
Hey
go for it.
Jeremy. Yeah, sorry. I'm always just curious about what the feedback looks like, your feedback loop, and how do you, I mean, I don't even have a sense of how many students you might have in that upper level class, but when students are turning in their weekly reports or journals for, because I can't remember the term you used in the labor-based model, what kind of feedback are you giving? And does it I don't know, like how much time are you giving to that feedback as you go? Is it mostly in class or is it like to the side personally for each student?
So the way that I've been structuring the feedback for that course specifically is the progress reports are something they'll turn in through Brightspace, and then they'll link to their code document or they'll attach their work in some way, and then I basically write my like if they have specific questions, I'll address the specific questions. But even if they don't, I'll still look through the material and make specific comments. So this is a case where I can sometimes write just as much to a student who has a lot of questions as to a student who has no questions. They have no questions, but I say, oh, like I see you did something very interesting in this solution. That reminds me, like this is actually, leading towards a more advanced technique. Here's a resource that you could read some more up on. Or sometimes people turn in work and it satisfies the proficiency, but something else in there is wrong. So then I can say, okay, you've satisfied the proficiency, don't worry about that. However, note that you made like this minor error earlier on. So it really is, I'd say I'm trying to structure it almost like a performance review kind of a thing where we can talk about, this is what you've done well, this is what you need to work on a bit more. So but it is all written or comments to their code if they provide it in that format.
Thank you.
Oh, and maybe an important note about time estimate is this is not significantly more time investment than other methods. So I do have 21 students typically. Skidmore is a little bit spoiled. There were like 8 to 12. But now the like computational physics here is like 19 to the like high teens to low 20s. And I would say I would usually spend an hour and a half to 2 hours per week on the progress reports, which is really not that much time per student. So it's like a pretty reasonable investment for what I think is pretty good impact. But each student is
Yeah.
turning in like 3 or so short code snippets per week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I was going to ask how you feel like this dovetails with some of what you're kind of learning about and developing in the Faculty Ambassadors of Inclusive Excellence program, and how these kinds of alternative grading approaches do promote inclusive and equitable practices in the classroom.
Yeah, definitely. I think you can kind of see like the seeds of that were always there from the start, right? My primary concern that pushed me in this direction was how do I fairly assign grades to such a heterogeneous incoming group of students, right? If I say that by the end of this semester you should be able to, oh, I don't know, write your own eighth order Runge-Kutta solver from scratch. I've got students who will achieve that in a year, but we have, 4 months, and I have students who could achieve that next week. So like those sorts of specific end targets felt less fair in a way, right? We already have a huge problem in intro physics where the number one predictor of success in introductory physics is whether or not you had physics in high school. That's pretty much it. If you've already seen the material before, turns out the material is easier, you know, mind blowing. So I did want to try to find a way to say like, okay, how can everybody learn something meaningfully in this course, and how can I have the grade reflect maybe the delta, right? How far they have come since the beginning of the semester versus something about where they started relative to where I wanted them to end up. So I think, and that feeds into maybe another aspect of this is I really wanted to be able to emphasize student agency with these kinds of grading schemes, allowing them, of course, to design their own projects, but also for showing the proficiencies, right? I had like there were portfolios, they had to show some proficiencies for one of the more recent versions of this scheme that I'm using. But there are a lot of different prompts that I give them that could show proficiency. So they do have some choice in what it is they want to solve to show proficiency. And this semester, I've also started telling the students, I'm like, look, if you find an interesting problem somewhere else, bring it to me and I'll figure out with you like what proficiency that could show. right? So I had a student who was learning about, we're still in sort of like the intro to computing part of computational physics, was learning about QR codes. And it's like, oh, that's kind of cool. Is there like, could I write a little like mini QR code generator and use that to satisfy some proficiencies? And I said, yeah, right? There's some involved mathematics in there. There's something relevant to, I think, a scientific and engineering context. So if you want to write that, I'll give you these proficiencies once it's done. Yeah, so I think those ideas of trying to meet the students where they are and then also let the students take some control of what the final assessment looks like for their grade are both important parts of like the inclusive excellence idea. And like I am still at the end of the day like the adjudicator of what counts as a proficiency, of like what like what expertise looks like, which is my job, right? That is part of why I'm here. I'm here to tell them like, yes, you are working at like you have a solid grasp of the material. Carry on.
Fantastic. I love that notion of prioritizing the delta or the change. And that, is really the point of the title of the book, Grading for Growth. Because as you said, it would be kind of inequitable, the way that we do traditional grading, and which takes me into back to the notion of origin story. And I want to, I want to do a go around where each of us can share, because we're a nice small group, just something of a origin story of our interest in this. Obviously, not everyone is, has done as much as Jeremy has with it, but there's something that brought you here to this Zoom today. So I'm just curious as to what your origin story of curiosity around this topic is. I'll share the origin story that the author shared in the book as well. But before we do so, I'm just going to put this link in the chat. In our book club, I like to put together a collaborative notes document that we can all have as a shared resource for us to collaborate in, and also just as a resource for you to have additional resources in the future. So this one, it's for our February meeting, has a bunch of resources, including the book itself, the Substack of Grading for Growth, which I highly recommend. It has a ton of articles by not only the authors, but many guests, including Katie Matini, who will be our special guest in our last session this spring, who graciously shared a bunch of resources with me, which I'm sharing with you, a resource guide, a set of slides that she did put together for a workshop, a podcast interview she did, and then, of course, to go back into our theme of equity, these two articles by David Clark, one of the co-authors from the Grading for Growth Substack. So kind of making more explicit that the connection between equitable educational and instructional practices and grading for growth. And David Clark refers a lot to this book, Grading for Equity, what it is, why it matters, and how it transforms schools and classrooms. And just to go down a little bit, in case folks watching this later didn't get fully to the reading, one of the key concepts is the central role of feedback loops to human learning. If you just think about a baby learning to walk or whatever it might be, you don't they don't get a grade based on the first time they did it or a grade at all. They fall a bunch of times and keep getting up and keep doing it better and better and better. And some of them master it at, a younger age, some of it master it at an older age, and that's okay. And that's kind of how human learning authentically works. So some of the grading systems that we have are not so authentic to how human learning really works. So some of the purpose of this is to kind of bring us back into that authenticity. And Clark and Talbert outline their schema, which is the four pillars of grading, or of kind of alternative grading, or how grading kind of would ideally work. This is all from the book, but I'll give you the quick version, which is having clearly defined standards so students would understand exactly what is expected of them, having helpful, actionable feedback so the professor's role as expert isn't just adjudicator, but also, here's where this is really great, and here's where it could improve, and here's a chance to do the improvement. And then, and then the last one, of course, reattempts without penalty. So when they do attempt to get better, they can do so, and that first attempt doesn't, lower their overall grade. And that if there are grades and marks within the course itself, they indicate progress, they indicate growth, they indicate what is what is going right. And to go back to something Jeremy said, I wanted to also say there are also alternative grading systems where it's really clear what, if a student wants to earn an A, if a student wants to earn a B, if a student wants to earn a C, here's the standards you'd have to meet. And that's fine. Not everyone necessarily wants the same grade and has lots of other demands in their life. And so maybe providing those as clarity, again, clearly defined standards is another possibility. These are, by the way, are from Katie's workshop slides, so you can take a look at the full version. But this next one is from the Joe Feldman book, Grading for Equity. He has these three core concepts that equitable grading practices truly reflect student learning, and what they're not only able to understand, but kind of where the journey they've gone on. And there's this great in the book. There's a great kind of thought experiment where he's like, there's three students, one of whom got a 75 on all three tests, one of whom got like 0 on the first one, but did amazingly well on the last two, and one of them did like really well kind of really well on the first one, but then kind of like slowly went down, and like they all end up with the same grade if your grading scheme is like the three exams are equally distributed. So is that equitable, and who really learned more, and how is that reflected in the grade? They're bias resistant, so they promote the success of all students, and they don't replicate the disparities in opportunity of a student who might have access to, more resources, more tutoring, have taken physics before, etc. And they're motivational. This is something that's really big. The systems we design can support or not growth mindset, and that the reality that learning happens through falling and trying over and over. And it's really easy to kind of lose motivation. So the first discussion question is, what's your alternative grading origin story? And there's a bunch more discussion questions. Feel free to have a look at them, and if there's any you're particularly excited about, and if you have any takeaways from the discussion, please add them here. It's a collaborative notes document, so I'd love to have all of your ideas. But to go back to our first question, the alternative grading origin story, I will share one of the ones from the book that really stuck out to me. I'll share mine really briefly, and then I'd love to hear from Melissa, Tom, Jamie, and Andrew about just what's sparking your interest. So one of the authors, the story that really struck out with me was that he had a student in his class who was very enthusiastic about calculus, and was the kind of student who just took a little longer to kind of have the material like gel in her mind, and basically was like, okay, like a week after the exam, like really got it and could explain it even better than everybody else and could really apply it. But like in the, when the date of the exam was, like, wasn't quite there yet, and got a poor grade on the exam. It didn't show, what she could really do. Maybe there's some anxiety that came in also. And basically, because of the way the grading system was set up, halfway through the semester, she was guaranteed to get a poor grade. And not only did her interest in the class wane, her motivation waned. She ended up dropping out of the class and was like, math isn't for me. And this is, was like even acting out in class. Like, she came into the class super energized and excited about it. So he just watched this student basically like fail because of the design of the grading system, and he was like felt powerless to change it, and he was like, wait, there's got to be a better way. And then since then has found all these better ways, and in his current class, the way it's set up, he's like, that student would totally be successful, and that it would meet her where she is. So great example of equitable and inclusive practice. And then for my origin story, I actually had the opportunity to work at a high school that literally did not give grades. They only gave comments. And so as a teacher, I just had to write a lot of narrative comments. But that was actually really cool because the students were A, a lot less stressed out about grades, B, a lot less like focused on grades. I also worked at a really kind of high-end prep school where students were like super grade focused because they all wanted to get into the Ivy League, and it was like, why did I get an A minus, and it wasn't about the actual work, you know what I mean? And at this other school, it just like wasn't the case. So that was nice. There was definitely more focus on actual learning. And also, I don't know, it just changed the culture of the school. It didn't feel as much like people were playing the game of school. It felt like people were a bit more in it to be collaborative and to explore interesting ideas together and do meaningful work. So obviously it had its issues. Also, nothing's perfect. But that was definitely a origin story that, when I was reading this book, I was like, yeah, this is not that radical compared to even my experience, right? Because in the author's experience, they still have to give grades at the end of the semester. So how do you do that? How do you get to those letters or numbers or whatever in a way that feels more equitable, inclusive, and supports authentic and meaningful learning? So yeah, let's go around. I'd love to hear from y'all about your kind of origin stories, whatever that means to you, whether it's an experience you had or just an interest in alternative grading and why. So the floor is open.
I can go. Um, hey, Andrew, I'm professor assistant, I guess, yeah, assistant professor in civil engineering. My background is mostly in structural engineering. And yeah, I think a big struggle has been like, just like the whole, is this a 7 or an 8 kind of thing? And then also being like, and just like really like sitting there kind of like belaboring that. And so that's frustrating. And then also that it's kind of like, yeah, I mean, this suspicion that they didn't learn from it, you know? Um, and that's frustrating because, and I'm open with the students about it, and I try to be very like, I know that you guys are stressed about the test or about this, that, and the other thing, and like I try to be as lenient as possible and give a lot of partial credit, and but I don't want to. I don't want to be dishonest with you guys. Like your concerns are correct. You know what I mean? Like grades are not equal to the task of describing your performance. So, or, under the traditional paradigm with which I'm most familiar. So like, yeah, I try to kind of be open with them about that, but then it still feels very dissatisfying on my end. And I think what has drawn me to this in particular is just sort of being well, I mean, it's to read the book is like really, I guess, validating and or like eye-opening or consciousness expanding, just because, that there's like specific techniques and like I'm particularly looking forward to like very specific examples. Number one, number two, specific examples in like STEM. Because I feel like a lot of and also just discussions of just like in general, incorporating, for instance, DEI and I mean anything, like I feel like so much of that stuff it tends, or in my experience, it has tended to focus, or rather has tended to be kind of centered in social sciences and humanities. And so I'm like totally there for it, but it's just like then some of the suggestions will be like, all right, but I can't, I just can't do that exact thing in like STEM, and so it's very exciting to see stuff that's like very specific to like how a class like the ones I teach is structured. And I teach like sophomore and junior level, like statics and mechanics of materials and structural analysis. And so I'm very interested to talk to Jeremy about like physics. And we've met before, hey. And then the last thing, sorry, is just like experience with like a freshman class that I taught, like a first year class, which was like super fun because I wasn't bound by like the curriculum as it has been, as I've inherited it, which is like subject to all these ABET. Well, one, to just whoever wrote that thing before, and two, to like ABET assessment. So this first year course was just like, yeah, it was kind of just like intro to what does it mean to be civil engineer, yada yada yada, and like doing these like lab experiments, and there basically were no grades. It's like if you did it, you got the grade, and so it just felt it was just way more fun. So yeah, all those things.
Thanks, Andrew. That was awesome. Yeah, before somebody else jumps in, I'll just add that when I was talking with Katie, she was saying that, you were mentioning doing it in the first year class. And yeah, she was like, when she started at a new university and kind of went whole hog on alternative assessment, some of the students pushed back and they were like, what are you doing? What is this? This is unfamiliar. No one else is doing this. Like, is this really gonna work? So I would say like that's also a thing that can happen, and to start small and to, try it on one assessment rather than on redesign your whole class tomorrow. And also like if students are concerned, like have, some of the research to back it up or have some of the reasoning like really laid out and make it really clear, transparent, and evident why you're doing it, because that'll just get a lot more buy-in, rather than just like, all right, we're doing this thing, and everyone's like, what's with this? So yeah, take it away, whoever else wants to jump in.
The wait time. Yeah. So I'm Melissa Covian, and I am a faculty development specialist at Brunel University down in Georgia, small liberal arts school. But I actually started getting interested in grading for growth, or whatever we want to call it, a long time ago, probably more than a decade, because I started, like Josh, I started in K-12, specifically in middle school, and working with middle schoolers and middle school teachers. In really honoring the learning process of middle schoolers. And just as you were describing, Jeremy, students come to us with all different kinds of experiences and competencies. And when they're in middle school is a perfect time to sort of mold that love of seeing progress instead of tamping it down with like, you can't do this. And so I really got interested as a language arts teacher, thinking about the changes and helping students get focused on their growth or progress in writing. That's something they can control. Like it's all in their control, really. And so just playing around with teachers. I was a principal for a while, and so really pushing to like allow. It's like not allowed to allow this extra time for students to get better. And well, we're not holding them accountable for this, and so it's been interesting. Of course, writing is something that you automatically think you should be giving a lot of feedback on, but just seeing students who may not have been the strongest writers, and we're definitely not the strongest writers, find themselves in something about their writing. So that's kind of how I got started. And now, at Brunel, I'm also doing a book group on grading for growth. And so I appreciate listening in on this conversation today. Thank you.
Great to have you. Thanks for being here, and welcome, Lara. We are just sharing our kind of origin stories, alternative grading origin stories, what made us interested in this, or if we've had experience with it, kind of what was the impetus to reimagine or reconsider the way we're doing things. Jeremy, you put a really impactful note in the Zoom chat, and just in case people are watching this recording, could you just share out loud kind of what you were sharing about the importance of framing and how that's played out in your classroom?
Yes. Yes. So this was adding on to the discussion about, maybe initially finding student pushback, which I'll say I have seen student concern, maybe like uncertainty when this is first introduced. And so I find, I'll just read it out. Framing matters hugely. Wentworth students in particular, I found responsive to the idea of you need specific skills for your future career, so I'm going to assess your ability to do specific skills for the specifications-based or the labor-based approach.
Awesome. Yeah, and I love how you customize that, in terms of like for Wentworth students, this is working really well. And you used to be at a different university with a different population, and a different approach would have been better. So that's fantastic. Great. Tom or Jamie, do you want to share any origin story vibes that you have going on?
I can jump in, Tom. You'll be next, I guess. Um, Especially with that note, Jeremy, you just shared about helping students think about their future careers and what they need. So I work in the co-op and careers office. So I teach two sections of Intro to Co-op. I also support the professional development co-op, which is our in-house opportunity for students who haven't found a co-op, but either might exit out of it or just want to do some technical upskilling for the semester in preparation to go out on a co-op the following time they're eligible. So that both mandatory co-ops and intro to co-op and PDC are all graded on a US like satisfactory, unsatisfactory basis. So we're in a really good place in terms of asking students to set goals for themselves at the beginning of co-op, like what are 3 learning goals you have, and then they evaluate themselves on those 3 as part of their end of semester evaluation. So that's, I think, very helpful in terms of them feeling engaged and like it applies to them. Outside of my role at Wentworth, I have 3 kiddos, one in elementary school, one in middle school, one in high school, who are all coming home with good report cards, and are stressed. And my background is in education. I served on the school committee here, and I also helped develop the competency-based grading framework for Melrose Public Schools, which is where I live. So I've been able to see this happen. We've covered the elementary schools so far. The middle and high school are still on a letter grade system, but slowly moving towards like a lot of the principles and the 4 pillars are in place now. My kids spend a lot of time retaking tests they've already taken so they can just demonstrate their mastery of the content. But I'm definitely coming at it from the sort of the access and equity piece of how we make learning not just engaging, but just accessible to all of our students. So I'm really grateful that I get to connect with all of you today.
Me too. Thank you so much for being here. Yeah. Tom, do you want to jump in?
Sure. I think something I found interesting in my role working with managing the tutors here at Wentworth is it's often a really great learning opportunity when students bring to a tutoring session some graded assignment they got back or graded assessment they got back. And it's very interesting, I think, as a tutor, like how much you can do with them when they've gotten that round of feedback. Like a lot of times they'll make really big strides. And so, kind of just observing that happen, it really I found it really emphasizes that like, the grading shouldn't just be like a measurement. It's like kind of a step in an iterative process. And so in the tutoring context, it's like the ones who kind of on their own motivation are coming to like kind of make it that iterative process because you're like, all right, I want to do better on like the next quiz or whatever. But I think it certainly motivates me to think about like how do we, to the degree possible, build that into the structure of grading and making sure the grading is part of like the teaching process and not just a measurement of the teaching process or learning process.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And Lara, you're more than welcome to jump in. I know you were sharing that you were excited by some of the reading. So do you want to, if you want to share anything that you've been reflecting on or about alternative grading, what you're excited about, you're welcome to. Well, we'll see. Maybe Laura will rejoin us in a little while. For now, let's go back to those discussion questions from the collaborative notes document. Is there anything from there that's sparking any of you all to, want to share something or want to raise something, either based on the discussion questions that are in that document we all have access to, or just based on, anything you've looked at, if you've had a chance to look at the first section of the book. Is there anything that's coming up for anyone? Yeah, go for it. Hop on in. Just jump in.
Yeah, mostly about like, what hesitations I might have with the alternative grading systems. And it's kind of just due to that, like the syllabus that I've inherited and the being subject to like ABET. So for those, Accreditation Board for Engineering and Technology, I can't even actually properly remember, but like, so there's a lot of pressure to like, we have to cover these topics. So that kind of feels like slightly different issue because it's like, well, we don't like actually have to cover all those topics. It's a little stupid. Or actually, I shouldn't use that word, but it's just very, very frustrating. Um, yeah. So I guess just, and it's kind of a question in particular for Jeremy, like for how you do this for physics one. Uh, yeah.
Yeah. I Yes, even though physics is not part of like physics programs aren't usually accredited beyond just like the general accreditation the school gets because it is engineering physics and the engineers care, they certainly care about what we teach in our classes. So that is a concern that I share with you. I would say just based on my experience with Nechi, having come like done that eval, if you are still covering the material and you're demonstrating that you are like giving your students the relevant feedback and but basically if you have the paperwork, if you have the paper trail to show like, look, I'm using research backed methods that are supposed to improve student understanding of the material, and you can see from my syllabus I covered all the things you want to cover, you're probably going to be in a fine place right there, right? That's my take. That's what I'm going to hope, at least when I try to do this in the intro physics classes. And I'll also add, I think, especially like sort of like the civil engineering angle, there's a lot you can do there with specifications grading. I think just because it's like here are like these specific things that I want you to be able to do in this like these skills you take away from this class. So if you especially if you pitch it like that. And I don't know if ABET's full range of like what they expect to see in a classroom, but I don't think they say you need to use certain grading schemes. Yeah. But I definitely want to talk more about this, I think.
Yeah. And some of this is parsing out just like what is like resistance due to ABET, what is resistance due to like the curriculum like ICC like internally, and what is resistance due to just like other faculty members who don't want to do it. Um,
Oh, one thing the book does talk about, which I think is very important to like have ready to go when you face any pushback, especially from like institutional bodies, is that alternate grading schemes are not synonymous with lowered standards. And you can point to the pieces of the literature that are like actually the sometimes the standards are higher in a way because you are pushing the students to have like real specific concrete outcomes to their learning. Yeah.
and frankly, like I'm operating within a traditional paradigm as it is, and it's just sort of like, I mean, I can inflate the grades in the traditional paradigm, and if I'm being honest, I'm just being recorded, so but like if I'm being honest, it's just sort of like that's kind of because I am interpreting the grading to be sort of like primarily like punitive in function and not fostering learning, then it kind of leads me to be like, all right, well, at least I can give them a couple extra points and avoid like humiliating or completely demoralizing them. Do you know what I mean? Which is like, okay, through grade inflation. I don't know. So that, yeah, it's wrapped up in a lot of other frustrations, but yeah, I think, sorry, I went off there, but yeah, that it's not that this would be necessarily the source of like the downfall of education as we know it,
Yeah, something that the authors also suggest is that this idea of grade inflation might happen in a traditional system because you're like giving all sorts of random extra credit for things that are slightly extraneous to the actual like mastery of the content. Whereas in this type of system, maybe your overall more students are doing better because they have more opportunities to do better. Like they actually, the higher grades might reflect higher achievement and more deeper learning, as opposed to just being some sort of like arbitrary, inflationary pressure. Well, yeah. Um, other thoughts, other questions that this topic is bringing up for y'all?
So this may be a little bit off topic, but I'm going to throw it out there and see what you think. Um, I was with a group of students who were doing a restorative justice training last week, and they were talking a lot about when within a learning environment, like a school environment, there's a harm to someone, what is needed in response to that is some kind of repair. And what we often offer is punishment. And I feel like this is a very similar equation of where we're looking to provide learning opportunities. What we really need is constant feedback and engagement, but what we provide are grades that end up making us feel like we're good or bad or otherwise. So,
Yeah, that's a really cool analogy. I like that a lot. And it really speaks to the ways in which equity is embedded in systems, and the kind of traditional systems that we take for granted as being the way they are, as the authors describe in the book, are relatively new to the world and kind of arbitrarily determined. They were not kind of like put together through any sort of like best practices or research-based anything. It was just kind of like some fancy school started doing it. And everyone was like, well, I guess this is what we're doing. So questioning that is a pretty good idea, and doing so in ways that really try and promote equitable and inclusive outcomes is awesome. And I mean, in their subtitle, it's student engagement and authentic learning. Like, who wouldn't want that? So yeah, that's great. What other thoughts that do folks have at this time? Well, one question I have is just the last discussion question, which is, that the authors really advocate starting small and keeping it simple. So what small changes could you imagine implementing to your assessment practice, or to suggesting to, folks that you're in touch with, to help your students focus on authentic learning, right? To make the actual learning, how to walk, be a joyful process and full of helpful feedback, rather than a process of, like, you fell for the fourth time, so shame on you. What are ways that we could start small in that effort to kind of change the outlook and change the way that we are approaching assessment in general? Thoughts on that?
I was thinking that I might start trying to incorporate like test corrections or something like that. Like students often ask, or some students have asked about that, and I don't, I haven't looked into it super deep, but it's kind of like in my head. I'm like, maybe I should do that. And then also coupling that with like uh this semester, like teaching a course, so there's like the syllabus, the learning outcomes or whatever on the syllabus. And then the other instructor suggested just doing quizzes for each learning outcome as opposed to like 3 tests. And so, yeah, and maybe even trying to do like a weekly kind of short quiz. It's like, this is what we learned this week, and then you can do it, and then also you can turn it back in or something like that. So something like that, I've been trying to think about, work up the courage to try it, sort of thing. And I think that would be, yeah, an easy, or I don't want to say easy, but like a attainable within my zone of proximal development.
Great reference there. Love that. Thanks, Vygotsky. Fantastic. Love nerding out with y'all. So, Andrew, I actually put your 3 things you said in our key takeaways from our discussion. More formative assessments. And yeah, I like the idea of kind of short quizzes aligned to the learning objectives with opportunities for corrections or improvements based on feedback. And the top thing, multi-stage exams, is something that I recommend looking up, because there's a whole body of like knowledge out there in the world about multi-stage assessments, multi-stage exams. And there's a lot of ways to structure it and, different ways to do it, but it's one way to kind of have a test not be the be all and end all, but have it be a process of learning and development, and each stage gets assessed so that there's more of a holistic view of what's going on. Jeremy Wachter raised his hand. What do you got for us?
Just gonna add in there something that I did actually many, many years ago when I was still a grad student was group exams, which I think could be a very interesting sort of like building in the test corrections because I've done test corrections and I like them because it gives you a second chance, but I also feel like it creates a lot more work for me and it's just like sort of the same thing again. So it's like a good start, and I think it's a good it is a good like easy plus one to do. So definitely do those. But the idea of the group exam is the students take it separately and then they basically take it together in a group. And so they talk about the answer. They talk through like, oh, like, wait, well, how did you do this? How did you approach this? And then the final grade, like the simplest way could just be the average of their individual and their group. So like they turn in their individual work and then they turn in the group work. And so this does add a little bit of extra grading for you because you sort of have to grade the individual and the group result. But they pretty much everybody usually gets almost the right answer or very close to the right answer in a group. And then they've had to talk about it. They've had to explain their reasoning. They've engaged with each other. And so they're learning from each other in that process. So if there's any way to do like a group, yes, anything, sorry.
So yeah, which order do they do it? They do it together and then individually, or
Individually first and then
Mhm.
together.
Okay.
So basically, you give the usual exam time, and you could even maybe do a selection, right? Like here's the full exam, and then these problems you'll then do again as a group. So you come together in groups of three or four, you talk about it, you have your work that you did, you can share and discuss, and then like you come to an answer in consensus. Sort of, this is what we have decided to turn in.
And okay, maybe yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, that sounds very cool.
Also, I love Jeremy, your plus one reference, Universal Design for Learning. Doing a workshop on Universal Design for Learning for our faculty ambassadors next month. Hope you'll all be able to join us. I'll definitely send that out in the recap email as well with the recording of this session. And also, just one other quick thing about multi-stage exams. One version of it that I saw, I think from Eric Mazur, another science faculty at Harvard, where he'll kind of treat it like a very challenging problem set where students will get a crack at it at home, even like it's a take home thing, and with the expectation that they won't do that well on it because it's really challenging, but that they get kind of that first look at it, and that's worth like some small proportion of the overall grade, and then they get a time to work on it in groups, and that kind of group answers are worth a proportion. And then there's feedback given ESTAs, big classes, but feedback is given on what to improve, and then they get another crack at it on their own to kind of show what the final answer would be and why, etc. So it's kind of like a multi-stage like project that they're working on and working out, and really that the assessment itself is formative. Basically, the assessment itself isn't just like, okay, what can you do, but like, as this is actually going to be a learning process, a teaching and learning process, a process of discovery as you go. So that's just another way to rethink assessments in general. What if they're not just summative? What if there's some formative element embedded within them, and that the grade isn't all based on this one thing, but it's like, okay, each stage in there has a certain percentage and weight. So there is a way in which it kind of is indicating growth, and that there is a emphasis on the process rather than just the product, and learning as a process. So anyway, just some crazy ideas to throw out there. Once again, we at TLC are always here to collaborate with you, be your thought partners on this. So feel free to reach out. Obviously, your colleagues as well. Great to get the School of Sciences and Humanities and Engineering faculty working together. And if you do so, please let us know so we can write you up in our newsletter and make you famous on LinkedIn and or present at our showcase. We need more people to present at our showcase coming up in a month. So you are all welcome to do that. Eric Mazur, ERICMAZUR. I was just answering Andrew's question from the Zoom chat. he has a lot of really cool stuff out there about teaching and learning in the science classrooms. So thanks again. Oh, Jeremy got the thumbs up on that. Thanks again, everyone, for joining me. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, and I hope you can join us next month. We are going to have to change the time of next month's to from the afternoon to the morning, just because of there's a faculty senate meeting. I'll send that out in the recap too. But we have 2 more sessions on grading for growth. One on the middle section of the book, featuring Mel and Mommy, math faculty here, and they'll be getting a little bit more specific about specifications grading and some of the other grading systems. Hopefully, Andrew, to your point, maybe we can look at one of the case studies from engineering or from one of the STEM disciplines that's in the book. And then our last session will be in April, featuring Katie Matini, who teaches bio at Tufts and is a thought leader nationally in this kind of field. So really delighted to have her, and delighted to have you all with us now and then too. So thanks again for joining me, and hope to see you around before then. Feel free to reach out. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks, Josh.